With a Sega Menacer in my hands, I'm not afraid of scuzzy criminals. Nothing.
Bobby! Give your Aunt Bertha a big kiss.
Well, almost nothing.
The Sega Menacer, with 6 different games and 4 ways to play.
The Menacer is a light gun peripheral released by Sega in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, also known as the Sega Mega Drive. It was specifically created in response to Nintendo's Super Scope, and as a successor to the Master System Light Phaser. The gun is built from 3 detachable parts: the pistol, shoulder stock, and sights. As with other light guns, it requires the use of a CRT television and communicates with the TV via an infrared sensor. The Menacer was announced at the May 1992 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago and was released later that year. The game was bundled with a 6-game cartridge of mostly shooting gallery games. Sega also released a Menacer bundle with Terminator 2, the arcade game. Sega producer Max Sonor was responsible for the Menacer project and designed the 6-game pack. He originally proposed non-shooting minigames based on existing Sega licenses like Joe Montana, David Robinson, and Toe Jam and Earl, but most of the prototypes were abandoned due to the high cost in favor of more shooting-style games. The Menacer is remembered as a critical and commercial flop. Critics found the 6-game pack subpar and repetitive, and criticized the peripheral's lack of games. The Toe Jam and Earl spin-off game was held in the highest regard. Reviewers also recommended the Menacer-compatible Terminator 2 game. A direct-to-TV light gun that includes the 6-game Menacer pack was released in 2005. Alright, so I'm going to try out the Sega Menacer in this episode, and this was Sega's response to the Super Nintendo Super Scope. And as you can tell, it's designed very similarly, although I think the Super Scope is a little bit bigger. You'll notice that there is a sensor on top of the TV, similar to what you would use with the Super Scope. And the device itself actually runs on 6 AAA batteries. There are 2 binoculars instead of the 1 that the Super Scope came with, and you use that to stare down the barrel. So right now, let's see here, there we go. Right now I'm aimed directly at the camera. So it doesn't look like there's any sort of on-off switch for this, but I'm going to go ahead and give this a try. Alright, so Whack Ball is comparable to Breakout, although it has a little bit less catchy name. The player controls a large ball with the Menacer in order to push a smaller ball on the screen onto color-changing bricks that line the wall. Once all the bricks change color, the player moves on to the next level. Some bricks are power-ups that change the ball's size, or adds extra small balls into gameplay. Players who hit flashing bricks are punished. Inadvertently guiding the ball through a hole also ends the game. Overall, this is kinda fun, but then again, it is not usually a game that I would think of using a light gun for. So as you can see here, when I had the lights on, I was having trouble keeping the gun calibrated. As you can see here, I just fire, and it randomly fires across the screen without me moving the gun. I found out that I had much better luck using this with the lights off. Next, we'll take a look at Space Station Defender, which is similar to the other game on here, Ready Aim Tomatoes. In each level, players shoot enemy-filled pods as up to 8 drop in a memorizable sequence. There are 999 levels, however, I will not be playing it that far in this playthrough. There is also a power zone to charge shots and power-ups including extra shields. Overall, this is something that I would expect in a compilation game, as it's not very involved enough for you to buy this game on its own, but it does give you an idea of good arcade gameplay with this accessory. So this is interesting. As I go to select the next game, it now gives me a warning that the screen is too dark. So, I don't know, I turned the brightness up on my TV, but I still encounter this message from time to time. It's nothing that prohibits me from playing the game, but it's just a minor annoyance. Alright, next game is Rockman Zone, and this is a simple scrolling screen shooter, as the screen scrolls through streets of houses as the player shoots criminals, and refrains from shooting innocent bystanders, for which the player loses a life if they do. As the levels progress, the criminals return fire faster, increasing the difficulty. This game reminds me a lot of Hogan's Alley on the NES, and is done just as well, although I think the NES was a little bit better because I was firing using a pistol rather than using the Menacer. Next is a game called Pest Control. In this game, the player's vision is limited to a small area of the screen around the AccuSight crosshairs while looking for cockroaches that attempt to eat a pizza on screen. Two different power-ups briefly illuminate the screen and clear all bugs on screen. Later levels feature larger insects that can contain bombs and small fast bugs. This game reminds me a little bit of the Fly Swatter game on the Super Nintendo Mario Paint cartridge. However, once again, I did not find this one as fun as that because I'm using a light gun rather than a Fly Swatter. But to tell you the truth, this game is not that bad. I actually enjoyed this as one of the better games on this cartridge. Ready, Aim, Tomatoes is probably the most recognizable game off of here if you have seen the Sega Menacer before. This is a spin-off of the original Toe Jam and Earl game, where the player, as Toe Jam, fires tomatoes at Toe Jam and Earl series enemies for points as the screen scrolls. As the game progresses, the screen scrolls faster, and hence the difficulty increases. The game also features power-ups and lock-on targeting to aid in player accuracy. Overall, I found this game pretty fun and a bit more nostalgic than the rest because I remember Toe Jam and Earl from the early days of the Sega Genesis, and I felt that this was an okay game.
Good shooting. Not.
The last game we'll look at on this cartridge is the game Frontline. In this game, the player defends against tanks and airplanes with a machine gun and missiles, with unlimited ammo. And although that description may be short, that's all there is to this game. So the graphics are very bland, the gameplay is very quickly repetitive, and I didn't really enjoy this game too much on this cartridge. So when I first recorded footage for this video, I actually did not own the correct Terminator 2 game that is compatible with the Sega Menacer. The first game I tried was Terminator 2 Judgment Day, which is the incorrect cartridge. As you can see here, it's a standard side-scrolling shooter, and this is not something you'd use a light gun for. However, before completing this video, I was actually able to find the Terminator 2, the arcade game, which is the one that is actually compatible, and so I thought I'd feature that as well. So Terminator 2 Judgment Day, the arcade game, is based on the film of the same name. It originally hit arcades in 1991, and home conversions were released by Acclaim Entertainment for various platforms under the title T2, the arcade game, in order to avoid confusion with numerous tie-in games that were also based on the movie. This game was converted to two 16-bit home consoles, one of them being the Super Nintendo, and the other being this version here for the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. However, it was also ported to the 8-bit Sega Master System and Nintendo Game Boy. However, in this version, as well as the Master System, they could not do scaling due to the hardware limitations, and so many of the images are redrawn at different sizes. The Game Boy got around this problem by having enemies move around the side or top of the screen. Another interesting note is that on the Master System, the light phaser was not supported, only the controller. When you start the game, you'll be given a full bar of health and a minimum of 3 continues. You can use the trigger to fire a machine gun, however you can also fire rockets, and, depending on the stage, you can also fire shotgun shells. The standard gun will slowly overheat, so shots need to be planned carefully. Stages scroll automatically, sometimes a certain amount of enemies or locks will have to be taken out in order to proceed. Various items are hidden that will increase firepower, gain extra credits, and the like. The amount of enemies and layouts sometimes make it impossible to avoid damage, meaning the game cannot be cleared without using continues. Overall, the game has a total of 7 stages, although I'm just going to show the first one here. Compared to the arcade version, the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis port differ greatly in terms of visuals and slightly in content. Visually, the game features a lot of pixel artwork instead of digitized graphics. The palette has also been considerably brightened, and I would assume that would be to aid the light gun in tracking motion on the screen. And of course, because there's no full motion video in either of these versions, the ending cinematic has been replaced. Overall, I feel that this is a solid port of this game, although it may not hold much of a candle to the original. So, are you disappointed I didn't feature more games? Well, it's not because I don't own anymore. Well, I guess that is part of it, but it's because they didn't make any more. These are the only 2 Sega Genesis cartridges that are compatible with the Sega Menacer. I mean, that is an insanely small amount of library for a peripheral that you want for your system. I guess maybe they thought there was going to be more support from third-party developers, but no, this is it. There is nothing else. And here is more evidence of Sega's ineptitude when they came out with their accessories and peripherals for their system. Just like with games that you would have to have the 32X and the Sega CD to play, there is even more games where you have to have the Sega Menacer and Sega CD games, because all future games after these 2 that supported the Sega Menacer were only available on Sega CD. And yes, even one of those on this list required both the Sega CD and the 32X and the Sega Menacer. So the small game library aside, what do I actually think of the Sega Menacer? For the games that are there, I think that this accessory, had it been supported, could have had the potential to beat out the Super Nintendo Super Scope. And my main reasoning behind this point is that you can take the Sega Menacer apart and hold it like a handgun. Now, granted, it's more like handling some sort of futuristic light phaser, but it's better than handling the Super Scope for a long period of time. Having said that, do I believe that people should be collecting this item today? Well, I'm going to say no, and that's mainly due to the fact that there are not very many software titles on the Sega Genesis, or Sega CD, or 32X for that matter, that support it. One other thing I'll point out is that I don't think that this light accessory works as well as the Super Scope because of the difficulties I had. I constantly kept running into the "your screen is not bright enough," and I was finally able, after finagling with it for a long time, to figure out the proper way to have my screen set, the lighting in the room turned down, and the proper distance to actually manage this thing, whereas the Super Scope didn't really require any sort of special finagling at all. It just worked right out of the box, and I didn't have to mess with it. I will say that I do plan to revisit the Sega Menacer once I am able to track down some more light gun games that were on the Sega CD. Currently, I don't own any. I also want to point out that this is not the only light gun that came out for the Sega Genesis. There was actually one released by Konami, which is called the Konami Justifier, and I'll plan to review that one also in a later video. Well, that's about going to wrap it up for this video. Remember, if you like what you see, please go ahead and click on the subscribe button. And if you want to see some of the videos I've already done, go ahead and click on one of the suggestions that are currently showing up on your screen. As always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you guys next time.